Boy, our audience is loving you, and it is an absolute pleasure to have you on the Blockchain Report this morning. How are you on this Thursday?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. And that was a really great intro. I wasn't expecting that.
Oh, well, you were befitting of a great intro, so it would be a shame for me to let you down with a bad one. So I'm glad you enjoyed it, Rajat. Now, for our folks at home who are meeting you for the first time, could you give us a quick backstory? How did you go from a decade in TradFi to becoming a full-time Bitcoin and personal finance educator? What was that like?
Yeah, for sure. So I did an undergrad in finance and an undergrad with major in accounting and a minor in finance. After I left school, I went to work at a bank as a financial services representative. Then I went to a brokerage, worked there in customer service, and then I moved up over time. Eventually, I was working in fixed income as an analyst. And I think one of the biggest problems that I saw is that most people don't quite understand the issue with inflation. As long as they get a 1%, 2% return on their assets, they're okay with it because they think that they're getting free money. They just want that nominal number to go up. They don't really care about the true purchasing power because they haven't even thought of it as being stolen from them because they have to work for money while other people can print it. To them, it's all about just having as much money as possible. They don't quite look 10, 20, 30 years into the future. Most people have a really difficult time zooming out. They're very zoomed in because everything that they're doing is on a day-to-day basis. They see the problems that they have daily. They don't really think about what the problems that they'll have are in the future. And because of that, they don't make the right decision. So the way that I do things is I try to explain from first principles why the current financial system is broken, how your misunderstandings are being used to make a profit by the banking system. So the banking system is literally designed to extract as much value from people as possible. And one of those things is through lending. If you're poor, they lend to you at a high interest rate. If you're rich, they lend to you at a low interest rate. And believe it or not, most people don't even know the difference between a high and low interest rate. They don't even understand how interest is calculated. This is how the system is designed. And I mean, my goal is just to help people to get through that, to navigate it so that they don't get screwed over by the exact same system that they're trusting and they're holding their money in. To understand them that when you have money in the banking system, that's not your money. It's their money. It's just an IOU. It's literally just an entry on a spreadsheet saying that they owe you something. You think that you own it, but you really don't.
All right, we're bringing Rajat back to the fold. Rajat, let's start here. Fewer than 0.02% of the global population holds one full Bitcoin. Why do you think hitting that milestone feels so significant to people, both financially and psychologically?
I think it's the law of just whole numbers. People want a whole number. They want one. They don't want half. Like if you're a billionaire and at some point you're only able to get to, let's say, 0.98 Bitcoin. At some point that's going to be the case because there's only 21 million. You're going to do whatever you can to get that last 0.02 because one whole Bitcoin, I mean, I don't really, so the way that I see it, one whole Bitcoin for an individual is actually too much money. At some point it'll be way too much money. You're not going to need that much money. What are you going to do with $100 million, right, in purchasing power?
Yeah.
You're not really going to be able to, well, how many steaks are you going to eat, right? How many mansions are you going to buy? We know that with Bitcoin the purchasing power of everything else will decrease in terms of Bitcoin if we do go to a Bitcoin standard. So once you do move to a Bitcoin standard, you start seeing that you don't really need as much money as you think. On a fiat standard, though, it's the opposite. With fiat, you need more and more money over time. There's a really great quote. I think it's Charlie Munger who says it. The first 100K or the first million is the hardest. And it's absolutely true because with fiat over time, because the fiat is losing value, it becomes easier and easier to accumulate it. You can get more and more of it more easily. On the other hand, with
Right.
Bitcoin, it becomes a lot more difficult to accumulate Bitcoin over time. So if the price of one Bitcoin goes from $1 to $1,000, it just eliminates a ton of people from ever being able to buy a whole Bitcoin because not everybody can afford $1,000 worth of Bitcoin. And then if it goes from 1,000 to 10,000, again, it eliminates another huge amount of people from being able to afford one whole Bitcoin. Then it goes from 10,000 to 100,000. Eventually, it'd go to a million. And at that point, the way that people see one Bitcoin today, they're going to be looking at zero point 0.1 Bitcoin because zero point 0.1 Bitcoin will be worth
Right.
$100,000. And over time, it becomes harder and harder to accumulate the same amount of Bitcoin because it gets more and more expensive. Your income isn't going to increase most likely as fast as Bitcoin does, unless you have, let's say, your own business, you're cutting costs the most as much as possible. Your income isn't going to increase as much as Bitcoin's price is going to increase because nothing can keep up with the Bitcoin network. It's the only truly finite asset. Even if you have a business and you're making massive profits, somebody's going to try to take part of your profits. So there's always competition. So over time, it becomes more and more difficult to accumulate one Bitcoin, zero point 0.1 Bitcoin, zero point 0.01 Bitcoin, whatever the amount is. Over time, it becomes more and more difficult to accumulate it. And because of that, you're going to see that, at least this is what I think, the number of whole coiners is actually going to decrease because even the people who own Bitcoin, let's say you said 0.02%, was that the number? 0.02%.
Yeah.
If that's the number, then what you're going to see is that that's going to drop because even the people who own Bitcoin don't completely understand it. And then there are people like Michael Saylor, who every time he buys 1,000 Bitcoin, he's basically eliminating 1,000 people from owning one whole Bitcoin. You can buy MSTR,
Right.
but you can't get that Bitcoin. You're not going to be able to get that Bitcoin because that Bitcoin is MicroStrategy's. The equity, the stock, the MSTR, is going to give you exposure to that Bitcoin, but you won't own a whole Bitcoin. So if you have, let's say, a Bitcoin's worth of MicroStrategy stock, you're not a whole coiner. You own
Right.
one whole Bitcoin worth of some derivative with the underlying being Bitcoin. It's an IOU. I'm not saying that MSTR stock is a bad thing to own. It could outperform Bitcoin. They could create business. They could create a line of business that makes it so that they're valued at much more than the Bitcoin that they have. But the point of Bitcoin is to be a bearer asset so that nobody can screw with you, right? Nobody can mess around with you. Nobody can take your wealth. With MSTR, they can. With Bitcoin and cold storage, nobody can take that. Nobody can take it away from you. That's the value. And then the um, the bias where people want that whole number, that entire Bitcoin, that obviously plays a role in this because people want a whole Bitcoin. They're taking a whole Bitcoin off the market. And as more people actually get to that whole Bitcoin, or even as more people compete to get to a whole Bitcoin, the the possibility of you getting a whole Bitcoin if you don't have one already decreases. So it just all it all just it's a cycle where as Bitcoin's price goes up, as it becomes more difficult to buy, one whole Bitcoin MicroStrategy's power to buy more Bitcoin goes up, and they can continue to buy more Bitcoin and eliminate more whole coiners. And again, it just keeps going. I think that a very small number of people who actually own Bitcoin today, who own a whole Bitcoin today, actually understand it. And I think that they'll eventually start selling, and they won't have a whole Bitcoin at some point.
Yeah. So you brought up an interesting point. I love talking about the human psychology of this. And we had Bloomberg analyst James Seyfert on the show yesterday, and him and I kind of got into this, and I would love to get your perspective. I feel like we're at an interesting human psychological impasse when it comes to the price of Bitcoin, right? Because right now we're at 120K, near that, close to the all-time highs. And we're at a point where there's a lot of people that might be interested in getting Bitcoin, but they're thinking, I'm priced out. I can't afford a whole Bitcoin, right? Because like you said, we're thinking these things in whole numbers. There's a real big psychological element to it. How big does Bitcoin need to get when people start to realize, I don't need a whole Bitcoin. I need 0.1. Do we need Bitcoin to be $1 million a coin for all of a sudden people to realize like, hey, even 0.1 Bitcoin is pretty darn good? Because I feel like people right now, it's either I'm getting a whole coin or I'm too late for the boat. Do you think there's a point on this journey to the next high of like 1 million where people are going to be like, oh, okay, we don't need to own an entire coin?
I think that's already happening. People are
Yeah.
okay with buying fractions and they're proud of owning, let's say, I get a lot on my YouTube channel, I get a lot of comments from people saying, oh, I just got to zero point 0.2 Bitcoin, or other people saying, I got to 0.03 Bitcoin, and they're getting more excited about it. Before, I don't know if you saw this, but there was a comment on one of these Bitcoin talk forums where somebody was saying how they had 600 Bitcoin and they feel like they're behind. That's the kind of conversation that people will be having. They'll be saying, I have 0.006 Bitcoin and I feel behind. I need to get to my zero point zero 0.01. Or I have
Yeah.
0.00 or point 0.098 Bitcoin. I need to get to my zero point 0.1. And they're going to put everything they can to get to that zero point 0.1 because again, as the value goes up, people's frame of reference also changes. In the past, when Bitcoin was at 15K, when it was right after FTX collapsed, people were thinking I can get to one Bitcoin. It was actually possible because if you think about it, one Bitcoin was probably a third to a quarter of somebody's annual income, while now one Bitcoin for the average person is probably more than double what their annual salary
Yeah.
is. So it's like thinking about houses, right? So today most people can't afford a house because the price is just way too high. So they have to take on a mortgage, and the current financial system is designed to make sure that they can get that house, they can bring their they can bring their future consumption to the present so they can buy that house and they can make that lifestyle decision that's actually extremely expensive. With Bitcoin, that's not the case. Not many banks are willing to give you a loan to specifically buy Bitcoin. So with Bitcoin,
Right.
you can't really think of it the same way as houses. A lot of people do think of it the same way as houses, but you can't really think of it the same way as houses. With houses, you can only get one. You can only get one. If you have a, what
Right.
are you going to do with 0.03 of a house? If somebody breaks apart a bedroom and
Right.
gives it to you, what are you going to do with it? You can't really do that, right? But with Bitcoin, you can actually have a fraction. There are people of all levels of wealth around the world who are accumulating Bitcoin. So what that does is it pinpoints all of the wealth into one asset. Instead of it being distributed with a bunch of other assets, the wealth is just basically focused on one asset, and it makes it so the price will continue to go up. And because Bitcoin is a Veblen good, more people will want it as the price goes up. More people will want zero point 0.1 Bitcoin when it's worth $1 million, right? More people will want
Yeah.
0.01 Bitcoin when it's worth $1 million. I think the way that I see it, most people ignore Bitcoin until whatever amount that they want to get to is unaffordable for them. So people will ignore zero point 0.1 Bitcoin
Interesting.
until they can't even touch it, right? People will ignore zero point 0.01 Bitcoin until
Right.
it's way too far out for them. That's exactly what happened with one Bitcoin. When one Bitcoin was 1 cent, I was ignoring it. I thought it was a scam. I thought it was a Ponzi scheme or whatever other thing people say to say that, oh, you shouldn't own Bitcoin. But now that it's now that the
Right.
price is going up, it kind of made me study it harder, try to figure out why the price is going up and question it more. But when the price was low, I mean, I didn't really care.